great compilation tape. Like breaking up is hard to do and takes ages longer than it might seem. You got to kick it off with a killer to grab attention. Then you got to take it up a notch. But you don't want to blow your wad, so then you got to cool it off a notch. There are a lot of rules.
12 albums, 1 cent. Find our ad in Sunday's paper. Take it to your mailbox. You'll get a lot more music. You'll get a lot more life. Look in your Sunday paper.
Welcome, listener. For those about to rock, we salute you. This is our podcast dedicated to exploring and talking about the greatness that was the music of the best decade. If you're ready for the best in retro music topics on the planet, we present for your enjoyment 80's Mixtape Auto Reverse.
Welcome back to another episode of Mixtape Auto Reverse. We haven't done this for a while. Been a little having some technical difficulties, and we're back. I've got things figured out, hopefully. So tonight, we're back again with Chris and Tim, and both of you guys say hi.
Hi.
Either one.
Hey, everybody.
Okay. So we are going to wrap up the decade finally with 1989, and I listened to the 3 albums that I'm going to be picking. I listened to all 3 of them today because they're in my library. Although I'm really, really excited to hear what you guys have to say about this year, because I was really digging for something that was really good. There's a couple that stand out, but we'll go through our top 3 and maybe you guys will have a couple honorable mentions, and we'll see how it goes. So,
okay.
Anyway, 1989.
I'd like to preface all this with one thing.
Yes, sir.
And I hope I'm not ruining anybody's picks. If anybody picks White Lion, I'm hanging up.
Okay.
I'll just let that be known right off the top. And Tim's first pick is White Lion.
No. I have a feeling I know where Chris is going in this episode, but I don't know where Tim is going in this episode. Tim surprises me quite a bit. He digs up some good ones. Yes. So, well, why don't we start with Chris? Why don't you take your first pick for 1989?
First pick for 1989. Well, I will not necessarily set myself out on a limb here, but I really have to go with a very common one. I'm sure that many people would like, but I have to go with Dr. Feelgood from Motley Crue. And back at this time in 1989, still very much a Motley Crue fan. All the way from all the first 4 albums before this. So it really made a big impact when you figure that 1989 Dr. Feelgood and Motley Crue, they were probably the biggest heavy metal band in the world for a good 2-year period. I mean, 6 singles off this album, constant videos, played throughout the world, toured forever, introduced a little bit different production where they kind of went with Bob Rock, got a little bit different sound out of it. Had some little more radio-friendly songs in there. Still, they're 2 basic things that they sing about, drugs and women, but
Yeah.
in a different way, in a sense. A lot of relationships had been gone. A lot of things changed within the band. And what you realize like this is how Bob Rock, after this, from the production side, literally, because Metallica heard this album and the production value, not necessarily the songs and all that stuff, that's how Bob Rock ended up doing the producing on the Black Album, a couple of years later. So it really was influential throughout the metal market. It made Motley Crue that much more accessible because it kind of went away from the black leather and all that kind of stuff. It was fun. The music was pretty good, for Motley Crue. But, I mean, you could literally probably go down and pick 7 songs off of this that you heard on the radio in constant rotation for probably a good year and a half. With, Dr. Feelgood was a little darker, but it had a great groove bass line, a great guitar hook to it. Kickstart My Heart, you still hear in commercials to this day. And think about that. That's, 27 years later, that's still in some commercials. So I just thought it was a fantastic album. I thought it was really good, top to bottom. There's a couple of, throw me away songs in there, obviously, like, every album ever made. But I just got a really good kick out of it. I think it's still an album that you could just throw in when you're driving and you'll still bop your head to it. I think some of the songs still hold up. Production is fantastic. Sort of took Motley Crue to a whole new stratosphere. And that's why I picked that album. Even if you look back and you think of, 80, 81, 83, 85, 87 with the other albums, here's that, again, that 2 year, every 2 years an album comes out, every 2 years, like 81, 83, 85, 87, 89. And it really just kind of stuck with me. And I still listen to it to this day. I still have it on my Spotify. I still pull up a couple of songs every once in a while. I just feel like hearing it. So, yeah, it was cool. Very cool.
All right. Tim, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, I definitely like it. I mean, you can't deny it. I mean, it was huge. Title track is awesome, and Kickstart My Heart is awesome. It's funny because back then I wasn't the world's biggest Motley Crue fan, but I remember, and I still kind of hang this over my buddies, my college buddies back then. I was the first one in my group of friends to go out and buy this, even though I wasn't the biggest Motley Crue fan, just because of the strength of the video for Dr. Feelgood, which had come out before the album. I was like, wow, maybe this is the Motley album I'm just going to love. Maybe it's going to be heavy from start to finish, and this will be it. And it's not, but it's definitely good. And it's cool that refreshing myself with it right now, looking through the credits and seeing all the guest stars. Bryan Adams was on it, Steven Tyler, the guys from Cheap Trick and Skid Row, and that was pretty cool. And but one of my favorite memories about this album is one of my good buddies had a roommate back in school who was a pretty buttoned-down guy, was not a metalhead or a rocker by any stretch. And one time we were in their room just listening to this, sitting around listening to music, and I had to look this up to remember it, but it was Slice of Your Pie, right? The end of that, it goes into this weird coda, And I remember our buddy Ron just he shot up out of his chair and he's like, "That's the Beatles! They're ripping off the Beatles!" And we're like, "What are you talking about?" And then we found out later that, yeah, they were quoting or whatever, paying on homage to She's So Heavy by the Beatles. And wow, it was cool because they had covered Helter Skelter in the past, but it was pretty neat. It was a cool little nod back to the Beatles, and who'd have thunk Motley Crue would do that, but definitely a solid number one for 1989.
Now,
Can I throw something in there real quick?
Yeah, please do.
Because Tim, you mentioned the people that were on, the kind of the guest stars and stuff like that. But if I'm not mistaken, and I haven't gone back and forth enough through reading about it, but if I'm not mistaken, this might have been recorded at Little Mountain Studios in Vancouver, because Bob Rock recorded a lot of stuff up there, and he also recorded some of what would end up being, I think, Slave to the Grind from Skid Row, and some of Aerosmith stuff was all done up there. So it's kind of neat because if you think about walking into Little Mountain Studios in Vancouver, and you're in Studio A and there's Motley Crue, and you're in Studio B and there's Aerosmith, and you're there's Skid Rows, and I mean, what kind of scene would that have been just from a metalhead to walk in and just what is going on here? So it's kind of cool because there was a lot of that stuff going on too. I think Aerosmith had a couple of songs that they recorded around the same time that had some stars on it. And it's just weird because a lot of these guys just recorded it at the same time. It's kind of neat.
However, I'm sorry, this is one of my least favorite albums, like, of all time. I just, it did not grab my attention at all, and I was so disappointed in Motley Crue. I just did not like it. I don't know why. Something about it just seemed, I don't know if it was too poppy, something, I don't know. Something about it just really just rubbed me the wrong way. And I know I'm in the minority because there's a lot of Motley Crue fans that love this album. My wife loves this album. She's like, I don't know how you can't like this album, and it's true. I've never had like an enjoyment of this. I don't know why. It's weird. Call me crazy, but that's just, I guess it's my taste. I didn't like. I guess Kickstart My Heart was okay, but the rest of the album, I just felt it was kind of weak.
But like not even Dr. Feelgood or Kickstart My Heart, because those aren't kind of poppy, really. I mean,
when Dr. Feelgood comes on the radio, I turn it.
You're dead to me.
You guys are at a loss.
No, I mean I can see what you're saying. It's not my favorite album by any stretch. I prefer Shout at the Devil, the first album, but
those first two albums I think are what it weighs too heavily for what they did afterwards, that I have a hard time appreciating anything that they did after Shout at the Devil. And I know it's just because I'm stubborn in that way. I have certain things that I like and certain things that I don't like, and after that, it just Dr. Feelgood. I was hopeful. A lot of people talked about it and thought it was going to be another big album, like you were saying, Tim. But it just really didn't. So go on, Tim. Tell me why you can empathize with me.
No, I get it, because it is poppy. I frankly think some of the songs don't hold up. But I really, really like Dr. Feelgood and Kickstart My Heart. I think those are two classic 80s metal songs that I don't think anybody can take anything away from, but I do get it. I know what you're saying. Like, Don't Go Away Mad and Same Old Situation. They're kind of sing-songy. To me, you get tired of them quickly, but I was not the world's biggest Motley Crue fan going in. But I did think it was cool that it got so huge. I mean, it was cool to see a band like that, keeping the 80s metal flag soaring high and being at the top of the charts and being everywhere. That, to go along with what Chris was saying, that was cool. I love that. But actually, song for song, no, I wouldn't sit down and, I wouldn't pull it out now and listen to it. But I definitely wouldn't turn the channel if Dr. Feelgood or Kickstart My Heart came on the radio.
Yeah, I usually do. I mean,
but here again,
yeah.
Because we've talked about this before in a few different years. What did Motley Crue realize? Motley Crue realized that there's a ever growing demographic of women and girls buying albums. Sometimes the motorcycles, the leather, the stuff, that everything was more of guy metal. You know what I mean? But so what happened in this when they're coming out in jeans? There's no makeup. They're singing songs like Same Old Situation. You know what I mean? Don't Go Away Mad. Very chick poppy kind of. They didn't go Poison or anything like that. And get
No.
that. But what I'm saying, they had a specific idea of how are we going to change again? Because album to album to album to album, Motley Crue changed their look every single album. So where do you go from the more like LA street look to the kind of, macabre look, to the pastel look, to the biker and leather look? Where do you go from there? What's your demographic that you're trying to hit? So why not? Everyone else is teasing up their hair real big. Poison's getting big. Bon Jovi's getting big, doing this stuff, kind of stripping down a little bit with all the crazy makeup and this and that. And so they're saying, okay, well, we can do that, but we can do it better. because we're going to sell 10 million albums. And our demographic and the videos and all that stuff, it was just a change of philosophy. Is the music fantastic? No. There's 2, definitely, maybe 3. Like, same old situation. It's kind of hooky. You have to admit.
I'll say,
it's
like
kind of.
lyrics,
I'm not saying it's the greatest songwriting, but it's kind of hooky. It's kind of a hooky tune.
I kind of like the lyrics. The same old situation. Don't go away mad. Like, they're kind of fun and poking fun at things. It's tongue in cheek kind of. But
yeah.
I think
they get too deep for me on She Goes Down. I'm not sure what that's about.
I think it was a girl backstage that broke her heel, and she fell.
Oh.
She goes down.
She fell.
It happens. Yeah. I think it was a very caring love song about a woman who broke her ankle because her heel fell off.
Okay.
That's where I'm going with that.
Okay. So I think one of the buzzkills for me for this album was Without You.
Terrible song.
Oh God.
Okay.
Oh, horrible.
Because
terrible song.
One of my cousins, I'm not going to say who, actually used it for their main wedding song.
No.
And she liked, Doc or a couple other, for the era she kind of liked a couple of the bigger hair bands, but wasn't a huge metal fan by any means.
Right.
And that was their their first dance song or whatever it was, and that that always stuck out to me as oh really? I mean, Motley Crue has been now they're a wedding song. Oh.
Yeah. Well, here's the fun part of me.
Say it isn't so.
And I'll be honest with you, is part of the reason. 98% of the reason I picked this album is because I generally do like a few songs on the album, and just for its weight in the heavy metal industry
huge
at this time.
It was huge.
But the other thing is that it's kind of funny, and it's fun for me to reminisce on this because, less than 10 years later, we're playing on the same stage, opening for them, and meeting them every night, and getting able to talk to them and hear stories and change music ideas and stuff like that. So it kind of brings back my moment being able to hang around them and play on the same stage with them too, which was really cool. So I kind of see Motley Crue, and part of it is because I enjoyed the music back then, and part of it is just kind of mentally reminiscing about that moment of getting actually to meet somebody that 10 years ago I was in the store buying their CD and saying I want to do this someday. You know what I mean? So that's kind of cool too.
Yeah, and that's what's beautiful about talking about all this music, is it's what each person's experience, what they bring to the table with the experience of certain albums. Over the last, we've covered 10 years now. This is the 10th year that we're covered, and we've all brought out some albums that we were excited about that the other two guys had never even heard of, or really they may have heard of the band or something, but never really experienced it and got it out. I mean, especially you guys. You guys, you exposed me to a lot of new stuff that I was completely blind on, and thank you very much for sharing those with me. But we all have these different experiences with different albums that brought out. That bring back those memories, and we get to reminisce about them, and it's fun. So everybody's pick is awesome. So however this one comes out for you is good, because it was just part of your experience.
Yeah, so. No, it's cool. So who's next?
I think I'm gonna let Tim go next.
All right, well, I got 6. And
oh
they're
my
all vying for the
really?
number 1 slot. So I don't know which one to pick, but I'm going to go with Savage's Gutter Ballet, just because, I don't know, it's Sabotage. They're one of my all-time favorite bands, and I really thought they were going to just get huge with this one. I thought it had everything. I guess maybe John Oliva's vocals maybe still were a bit of a stumbling block for some people, prevented them from really achieving, big commercial success. Because he still is, that gritty voice, I guess, just wasn't so radio friendly. But from a metal standpoint, there's just some great stuff on here, like Of Rage and War, and The Unholy is one of my favorite songs. It just drives, and it's got the cool background chant vocals. It's just dark and heavy and cool. And the title track, Gutter Ballet, with the piano, the piano intro, the piano really perfectly interlaced with a metal song. The instrumentals with Chris Oliva's guitar playing is so beautiful and tasteful. And then the humor. I love a song like Mentally Yours, not just because the crazy dude is named Timmy, but just because their wry and sarcastic take on some serious things. And Thorazine Shuffle's another one. It's just really
Thorazine Shuffle. That's good stuff.
A dark, twisted masterpiece. It's beautiful. It's heavy. It's hard charging, and there's so many emotions on it. And it just rocks. The cover art is spectacular. I just really think this is an epitome of their career, and it's a shame I know they had some measures of success. Gutter Ballet was on MTV and all that, but it's a shame they didn't get bigger, I think.
Yeah, I think that they thought. I honestly think that they thought that this was kind of going to be the one that took them to a whole different stratosphere, and they put a lot of work into it. I mean, they put a lot of work into it. And coming off of, Hall of the Mountain King, where, they started to get known more. And I think that although there was probably definitely some disappointment that it didn't, because it didn't take them to that, like you were saying, Tim, it didn't take them to that whole nother level when you become larger than life. It didn't really take them to that stratosphere. And that's disappointing when you feel like you put a lot of work into things, and you put a lot of work into your stuff, into doing what you hope is going to be making it all happen for you. But nonetheless, I agree with you. I think it certainly is one of their best albums when John was singing. And I think you're right in a little bit. I think John's vocals were still a little bit of, not necessarily, I would say that it was a little bit of a holdback, but I definitely think that there was just a little bit too gruffled, muffled, however you want to say that. It just was a little different, and not necessarily different in a bad way, but not different in a commercially viable market where you could very much see the different tone changing. You know what I mean? There was a different tone in the music, and some of that gruff and some of that way that they did the vocals were in the past just changed a little bit. And I think that there was a definitive idea of how to make that different going forward. And then that's why there were some changes that were made. But it is a great song, and Gutter Ballet is still one of my favorite Sabotage songs, along with most people who know Sabotage. It's good. The Unholy is great. Thorazine Shuffle has got to be one of the funniest song titles, but it's good. There's a lot of good albums on here. A couple instrumentals. You could see where this became. You can see a lot of in their music, and then maybe starting more in this album, what happened then with the next album and how it sort of transformed himself into TSO later. Like you said, the piano work is fantastic, and that's all John. That's classically trained, fantastic piano player. But yeah, and and they're local boys, so, and we worked with them and played with them, so it definitely is very close to my heart. Anything that Sabotage did, just because it was fantastic to see, guys from our area, guys that we knew, guys that we recorded with. We practiced in their rehearsal space. Our sound man was their sound man. So it really, really cool. So I'm glad that you picked this one first, Tim, because it was definitely on my list. So now I need to shuffle around for a backup. Thank you very much.
Well, again, I'm going to have to go and do a little research because I don't know this album. I know that I've liked the Savatage albums that you guys have mentioned before. I have not had a chance to check this one out because I hadn't gotten this far in the years to see what else they had released. So I don't have much to add to this other than I've liked what you guys have offered or what they've offered so far. So I'm gonna have to check this one out too, and see what you guys are talking about with the vocal differences.
Yeah.
That,
funny story though, real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Gutter Ballet. I'm not sure if I mentioned this before. I think I was saving it because I knew that this was this year. But so Gutter Ballet, we're on stage and we're doing a show, and we walked up and we changed the set list because he used to put the set list on his piano and stuff like that when he would play. And we crossed out Gutter Ballet, and of course John carried a little bit of weight, as the years went on. And they were doing that song, and we changed it to Gutter Buffet.
Nice.
And and needless to say, John wasn't super pleased about that. Because we also changed Hall of the Mountain King to Hall of the Burger King.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and actually, he got used to it after a while. In one show that we did, he actually did one in the one lyric. He said Hall of the Burger King, and then kind of looked over because we were side stage, and it was kind of a funny moment.
You have some good stories about being in that industry.
Fun days, man. Fun days.
Yeah,
some are not accessible to family-oriented podcasts.
Well, we'll have to.
As a matter of fact, quite a few are not accessible to family-oriented podcasts. So
we'll have to do a special episode and do a disclaimer.
Well, I'm sure Tim's got some stories too. So don't let him fool you. Don't let Quiet Tim over there fool you. He's a rager. So what you got for us? Give me a couple. What's your first album here, Scotty?
I was torn on which one to really talk about first, but I'm going to go with somebody that I've chosen in the past, and that's Joe Satriani, Flying in a Blue Dream. Yeah. I just love this album. I've always liked Joe Satriani's style, his riffs. This one has a few tracks on it that are a little more bluesy, got a little bit of a rock and blues influence on it, and it's just, I listened to the whole thing again today, and I'm like, yeah, I still like this album a lot. So I can't remember how you guys, I know you guys respect him as an awesome guitarist, but I don't know how you guys actually felt like you didn't really care about or didn't care much for Surfing with the Alien. I think that was you, Tim, right? Or didn't know it very well?
Yeah, I didn't. This was before I started to get into instrumental guitar work, other than what Yngwie was doing. But certainly, you have to respect the guy and acknowledge that he's a master. But
he's amazing. The whole rundown of the album. They got a lot more vocals on this one than they had in previous albums, but and he does a lot of the singing, so it was interesting to hear him actually doing the singing. And it's just a lot of great guitar work on this album, in my opinion. Chris,
didn't he have a video? Didn't he have a video for Big Bad Moon? That song title jumps out at me as something I would remember.
Honestly, I do not remember any videos associated with Joe Satriani.
Yeah, I believe he had one for Flying in a Blue Dream. I don't think it got much rotation, but I do believe there was at least one video, and I swear it was Flying in a Blue Dream. But the irony of what you said as far as vocals, Scott, too, is that a lot of that came from the record company, because they said, you might want to put some vocals on one of these instrumental albums if you'd like us to release it for you. So it just wasn't, and eventually, if you're just making albums and you're super talented like Joe Satriani obviously is, if the record company is not getting its return, doesn't matter how talented you are, they're going to kind of want you to sell some more albums. That's the whole point, really. And so there were definitely some vocals on here that were kind of, but I think he did a good job. I mean, he held up with his vocals, and obviously his guitar playing it's not only spectacular. It's incredible in some areas. And you think about how good like a guy like Steve Vai is, and then realize that Steve Vai took things from Joe Satriani, took him to a different level eventually, but it's that whole who begot who begot who begot who, and Satriani was definitely a big influence in a guy like Steve Vai. So when a guy as great as Steve Vai says, I look up to Joe Satriani's playing, that tells you a lot about what kind of talent Joe Satriani has. I love all of his music. It's difficult sometimes to just listen to constant instrumentals. You want a little bit of variety and a little bit of vocal or something to change up. But yeah, I put on some of his songs now and then. I've got like an instrumental playlist, some of Vai's stuff, some of Eric Johnson's stuff. That's just instrumental guitar work, and some of Eddie Van Halen's instrumental stuff. So yeah, I still do. His music doesn't really hold up as well because of the type of guitar playing that he was doing. It was a lot of runs, a lot of crazy guitar runs and all kind of stuff like that. So it's different. Some of it doesn't hold up, like I said, as far as classic. When you listen to a classic radio station, number one, it's a lot of instrumentals aren't going to be played on a classic radio station. Like even something on like satellite radio, it's just not going to get the play. But it's still, it's a good album, solid album for what he did. You know what I mean?
Right. For what it was, and I mean,
for what it was, absolutely.
Coming from you, that's good information, because being a musician, you understand like how you understand the techniques behind what he's doing, and I I have no idea. I just have an appreciation for music in general, and I just always liked his style of playing. So it's interesting to hear somebody that actually knows music,
Well, in a sense, he invented a style like that. Really, the arpeggios that he's playing, the kind of runs that he was doing in his guitar work, like a lot of that wasn't heard. You can go from the 80s and go guitar player to say, oh, I know where he got that lick. He sounds like such and such. He sounds like such and such. Name me one guitar player in history of guitar playing that you can say Joe Satriani sounds like
Right. You can even say Steve Vai has inklings of like Zappa.
Right.
Right.
And obviously, and for good reason. And Vai, even in some of Vai's earlier work, he has a little bit of Satriani in him. But it's hard to peg somebody and say, oh, Joe Satriani sounds like, he sort of just had his own thing.
Yeah.
And from an instrument player, from a musician standpoint, what he's doing and what he did, you cannot copy.
Yeah.
You cannot copy that. You cannot play like Steve Vai. You can try to play the notes, but you're never going to have the feel. You're never going to have the feel. The same way you can't play Eddie Van Halen. You can play the notes, but you're never going to get his feel. You're never going to get his touch, and you're never going to get his tone. And that separates the great guitar players from anybody else. You can have a cover band that can play a lot of these 80s metal songs if you go, and you play them note for note and you say, wow, it sounds just like it. But there's a few rare players that you can never just copy. And Satriani is one of them. That's why I have ultimate respect for him as far as a musicianship.
Cool. Sorry, I think we jumped in on Tim.
Yeah, sorry.
Did you finish your thoughts on this album, Tim?
Yeah, no, I was all done. Okay. That was good.
All right. So I guess we're back around to Chris.
Oh, we are?
Yes, we are.
All right. Well, this was kind of a year. It wasn't a whole lot of my music, in a sense. A lot of thrash and stuff like that, which I do, is kind of a little bit of a dead year for that. So I am going to go with what I thought was kind of hair metal because of the way they looked, but I think it was definitely just a little bit different. It would play out to be a little bit different later, but I'm going to go with Skid Row. And this is as hair band as I get. Skid Row is as hair band as I get. It is. It really is. I actually like the second album a lot more, but it's different decade. But I just thought they had a different attitude, a different look, a different sort of style of music. I think some of their songs back in '89. So '89, I'm 20. I'm 20 in '89, 1920 in that range. And it was just fun music. It was just fun, but it had a little bit more heaviness to it. Not all the songs, but I think my favorite song off of this is obviously with all the ones that hit the radio and stuff like that. But "Piece of Me" I thought was a fantastic song. Front to back, I thought it was good. I got stories about Sebastian Bach. I don't have a lot of respect for him as a musician or anything like that, but Rachel Bolan, Scotty Hill, Sabo, and Afuso, they're fantastic musicians. Didn't really get as much play for being as talented a musician, but I think that's part of the genre. That didn't really get a lot of, they're great musicians. They were, good-looking guys and all this kind of stuff, but I just thought it was a good album. I thought it was a solid album. I thought it ushered in a different era of metal, even though it wouldn't kind of last very long. But they came out in '89, right into the perfect storm in a sense. No makeup, no BS, just it's it. We're here, we're playing. And I thought it was fairly refreshing to see metal going away from the gimmicky makeup kind of pre-hairband kind of stuff, which I never got into. I never liked it. So, but yeah, I thought it was neat. I thought they were just kind of a little bit more out there than most typical bands of that era. It's a good album.
Yeah, this was one of my picks actually, and I love this album. It hit right at the right time for me. Youth Gone Wild was a fun song. Midnight Tornado, which I always like that one as one of the better ones on the album. But I just think Sebastian Bach, I don't know what you mean by you don't know, or you said you don't have a lot of respect for him as a musician, but that dude could belt it out, man. He's got he can sing, man. Unless you what is it? Talk to me.
Go
Tell
ahead.
me. No, really. I mean, the guy's got range, man.
Yeah, well, sorta.
What is it all in the studio?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of mixing, Good old Sebastian Bach, and I'm just gonna chalk this up as rumor or allegedly. I mean, I kind of know what I know, but so a lot of times in some of these songs, especially on the second album, and I don't know a little bit about this one, but definitely later aspects of Sebastian Bach's career, they would kind of call him like 7-take Sebastian, because what would happen is his voice was so stretched because he was trying to scream everything that he couldn't hold a tone or a note to make long runs in recording. So they would literally piece together phrases, sometimes even words that were in key with production to get a whole song. Like, singing a whole verse or a whole chorus all the way through and saying, okay, that's a take, let's do the next verse or let's do the next chorus. It would literally be like, okay, Sebastian, say these 3 words, try to sing those in key, and we'll see if we can't cut everything in.
Wow.
Like, yeah, so it was, but no, let's say it, like when he was on and was paying attention and had a good night, the cat could flat belt it out.
Yeah.
No question. But his consistency as far as in the studio and stuff like that. And if you watch some of his live, like the unedited live tapes and stuff like that, you can see where he just runs out of breath. Like instead of singing a verse like saying, you know, here I am, it's like it's kind of like the whole Vince Neil thing. It's like here I am, because he just couldn't hold a note in a lot of aspects. And I think it was because the way he was attempting to sing with that kind of that screamy, screechy, very loud, and trying to hold a lot of the like that, yeah. Almost very booming kind of voice he was trying to do. But all in all, I mean, who cares about that as far as the album goes? It's just, you know, you would never know the difference anyway. And yeah, Cat sang a lot of good songs. It's a lot of good verses. And I just would like to say too, there's a common theme here that I just kind of realized that both these albums I picked, the bass player wrote all the lyrics and music to both these songs. So I must somewhere be mentally channeling my inner bass player here. But yeah, this is a great album. What do you guys think?
I you know, like I said, it was one of my picks. Tim, what do you think on this one?
Yeah, I love it. I love Skid Row's first 2 albums. This one was recorded up the road for me in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, so that's pretty cool. You don't hear about too many big albums being recorded in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. But, you know, I've heard a lot of things about Sebastian Bach, but they always have to do with his personality, never his technical abilities. That's really interesting and, frankly, quite surprising to hear all that stuff. A little surprised, or very surprised. And, yeah, he's a character. I interviewed him once for my music magazine back, I don't know, 20 years ago, whatever it was. And he was like the funniest, most outgoing guy that I think I ever interviewed. But I've heard tons of stories about clashes personality wise in a, you know, working environment. So, but again, who cares about that stuff when we're talking about the music? And, yeah, they did fill a kind of a weird space because people do sort of think of them as a hair band, but you just can't think of them as like a Poison or something. They're just not that, you know. They definitely were more street than that, but they still were able to be commercial and hooky, but heavy, and they had a little bit of a darkness, you know, when they needed it. And Youth Gone Wild is an all-time classic, and I will argue that against anybody who says otherwise forever. That song is just awesome. Everything about it just works, you know, and you have to give him credit. You know, I could do without some of the ballads, but that was what everybody was doing back then, and it probably got him to sell an extra 1 million copies of the album. So, hey, you know, can look the other way on that, but great stuff, cool lyrics, a good look, and I you know, they did have a little bit of guy liner. I wouldn't say they had no makeup, Chris.
You're right. Yeah, they did have a little guy liner. A little bit of Maybelline pencil in there. You know, it's all right.
I've never heard that before. That's funny.
What guy liner?
Guy liner, yeah.
Oh, jeez. Are you kidding me? Just wait. I mean, go pull out some old '90s videos and see like 9 Inch Nails and all these bands. I mean, they pulled that guy liner out for decades after that.
I can totally see it. I think they're still pulling it out now.
Probably.
I really do.
You were wearing it the other night.
And the one thing I'm glad that didn't catch on was the Rachel Boland's, whatever you call that piece of jewelry that connected his nose to his ear.
I almost got that.
No, you didn't.
Really?
No, seriously. I did.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Almost did. Yeah, almost did at one point.
You're a madman.
I know. I was a rebel. What can I say? I never went through with it because I would be afraid that if I had to sneeze, I would blow that thing out of my nose and it bleeding all over the place.
What if you got in a fight? That would be the first thing the other guy would go for.
Oh, if you get in a fight, the first thing I'm reaching for is rip that chain out of your ear and your nose. Fight's over.
Yeah.
Fight's over. That's it. Fight's over.
Dude, you ripped my nose!
Yeah. One thing, funny story. I had a girlfriend at the time who liked this album.
That is funny.
It is funny. That's the end of the story. That's the end. That's what's funny.
Girlfriend at the time.
That's it. I had a girlfriend at the time. That's the funny part. It's like a rim shot should follow you, Tim, after you said that. I had a girlfriend who used to sing out loud because she didn't know the lyrics to Youth Gone Wild. She swore it was Nuke the World.
What?
Nice.
And she would sing it, and she swore it was Nuke the World. We're gonna nuke the world. I had to correct her eventually. I'm like, it's not Nuke the World. Don't let anybody hear you say that. It's Youth Gone Wild. Don't embarrass yourself in public.
Oh my gosh. That's funny. So
cool.
I was listening to this album today, and I don't recall this song, and I can't listen to it apparently. Can't Stand the Heartache. Do you know that one?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had it. I have the album on my iPod, the whole album. But every time that song starts, it doesn't play any song. It just skips to the next song. But it says that there's 3 minutes and 24 seconds of data. So something's wrong with that song, and I'm destined not to hear that song on my iPod, apparently. So, am I missing anything?
It's okay. It's not their best, but it's not crap.
Yeah.
Is it a ballad or upbeat song? What is it? I can't remember it at all. I don't know why.
It's kind of an upbeat song. It's definitely not a ballad. Yeah.
Okay. But it's not like Piece of Me or Making a Mess.
No, it's not that. It's not that heavy. No.
Yeah. Now, see, these guys. This is one of the things I think, and you brought it up earlier, that they were kind of street. You know, they had the jeans, and they were kind of a little bit more laid back with the. They weren't really the glam metal that was still going on, even though in the genre under Wikipedia it says glam metal. They kind of remind me of a heavier version of Tesla. Now, just the look. I'm just talking about the look, not the music necessarily, especially not the vocals. Totally different styles. But the Tesla had the jeans and the t-shirts. They were just kind of casual about the whole look, and Skid Row kind of did the same thing, although they had a little bit big hair. But I would say they fit into the big hair category. But they just seem like a heavier version of that of Tesla. Especially Tesla started taking it down a notch, I think, in the later years.
I just thought it was cool because one of the reasons I hated one of the reasons I hated the grunge era was just I like my rock stars to look a little special, to look like rock stars in some capacity. You know, that got overblown in the 80s, of course, with the spandex and the hair and whatever, but it's still, at least you knew they were the performers. They were on stage doing something to entertain you. What I find cool about Skid Row, and I get Tesla too, is that they could just go out there in somewhat normal attire. Yeah, sure, maybe one of them had leather pants on. You would never catch me wearing a pair of leather pants. But, you know, these guys are basically jeans, you know, and nothing outlandish, and they still looked cool. They still looked like rock stars. And to me, that was important in some respect. It had nothing to do with the music, of course, but it just added to the overall feel. And it was pretty cool they could pull that off.
I agree. I agree with that. Totally. They did look cool because they just kind of had like, I think on the cover it looks like one of them was wearing maybe a leather vest. You know, so they didn't really take it to extremes, but they still looked, you know, kind of badass. Really, just kind of tough guys hanging out. Whatever, singing a few songs, belting out 18 in Life, you know, shooting people and whatnot. So, anyway, funny. That's a good pick. So we're on to Tim for his second pick. What's your next one?
I'm going to go with The Headless Children by Wasp. because I remember going the day this one came out. I left my sociology class in college and walked over to Record Revolution in DeKalb, Illinois, and bought this on opening day. And I had to go back right. It was cassette tape, of course, and I had to go right back and open that up. And we had a listening party in the dorm, and it was. I love Wasp. We're talking about Motley Crue changing from album to album. Wasp did pretty well with that too, and this was their quote unquote serious album, where they were going to talk about, socially conscious things and get a little political, and it changed up some of the subject matter. And they had a big lineup change for this one. Frankie Banali played some drums on it and used it all over the place. It was awesome. And I think the first video they had was their cover of The Real Me by The Who, which was just, oh boy, I love that song. I love the heaviness in Blackie Lawless's voice. Again, talking about Savatage and John Oliva, Blackie Lawless kind of has that gritty metal voice too, but he could take it into softer around the edges. He can sing a ballad, and like Wasp ballads I can actually get into because his voice makes him feel, I don't know, grounded and real. It doesn't seem like they're just writing a ballad so they can get on the radio. It's just kind of a different vibe. But they had, I think it was Ken Hensley from Uriah Heep played some organ on this to add some just evilness to the backgrounds on some of the songs. Mean Man is just a hilarious rocker about being an insane partier. It's about Chris Holmes, the guitar player, who, of course, we all saw him pounding vodka in his mother's swimming pool in that movie Decline of Western Civilization Part 2. Everything on this album, I mean, yeah, Maneater, I guess maybe you could say is a bit of a throwaway, but I don't know. I can still listen to this one from start to finish and not want to skip a single note of it. It's just heavy and cool, and I was so happy that they went this way. And they've since, it's been many years, of course, since their heyday and since this album came out. They've tried to go back and do the serious thing a few times in later years, and they could never, in my opinion, go back to touch what this album was doing. This is one of my all-time favorites.
All right. Well, I don't know this one very well. I do remember the song "Real Me" and being the cover of The Who, and I liked it a lot. I never really listened to the whole album though. I don't know why, but I just never really followed much of Wasp. They're very interesting band, and Blackie Lawless is definitely a character.
Well, I think that hurt them because, I mean, I'll admit it, Wasp is kind of a stupid band name, and they did kind of have a reputation as being kind of over the top, goofballs, and this album was a little more serious. And so I think people who knew them from the first few albums and thought, man, those guys are a little silly, a little childish, I'm too old for that sort of thing, they just probably completely overlooked this album, and I think that was a mistake, unfortunately.
They couldn't take it seriously.
Yep.
Interesting.
No, I don't think it. Yeah, I think that is one thing that hurt Wasp was sometimes the antics of Blackie kind of. I think it kind of did take away a little bit of any kind of staying power in a sense, because I don't think they were taken seriously, and I think it's a shame because they're very talented and they have some really good songs. They were never like a favorite of mine as far as a band, but they have some good songs, some really good songs. Chris Holmes is a good guitar player. I think the shame of it all is, like you said, Tim, is that sometimes when people think of Wasp now, they think of Blackie Lawless's kind of ridiculous, over-the-top sort of personality, and Chris Holmes almost drowning in his mom's pool. So with vodka, and I think it's a shame because they were talented musicians and they did release some good songs. But at this point, for me, Wasp was kind of okay. That's just a little bit outside of my scope of what I was listening to consistently. But Maneater's good. The Heretic is a good song. I do like that. I really like that one. But other than that, I don't think I listened to a whole much of this album. I never bought a Wasp album, so I can't say that I ever listened to one front to back. So I could be missing something, but I do think it's a shame because I think they had a talent, definitely a talent and a niche, but I think it sort of kind of got overlooked for other reasons than playing music, and they just kind of got lost in that shuffle, unless you were a super, super, super Wasp fan, and there are some out there.
Oh yeah, there are for every band.
Yeah. So, but that's about all I've got on Wasp. I always wanted to meet Blackie Lawless. I always thought the guy would be fun to hang out with.
I could see that.
About 20 minutes until your life is in jeopardy, and then you got to leave. Because I always felt like hanging out with Blackie Lawless could be really fun and just go downhill quick.
See, I think then his image was very successful back then, because the one time I interviewed him and one time I met him face to face, and he was very, very quiet, thoughtful, and reserved. He was not like, hey, let's go get hammered and party, kind of guy. Let's go do outrageous stuff and eat raw meat together. It wasn't like that.
Which is great, because that just tells you how much he had. A lot of the bands and musicians that made it, that had a career or that just made it out alive had two different personas. There was a stage person and there was an off the stage person. So in a sense, it was sort of like acting in a way, because you had this persona, and some people, when they get on stage like that, they need that extra persona because it helps them deal with being on stage, whether it's stage fright, whether it's performance anxiety, anything. They almost had to put themselves in a different person to be able to go out and perform as that person. That Blackie Lawless, Tim, that off the stage is not going to be crazy and make this music on the stage and play and be a fool and just be this. He had to come up with something that pushed him to be on stage. And I think a lot of times, like I said, the people that made it out and the people that were successful after the music was over and didn't just fall off the map or die or whatever the case is, were the ones that had that different personality.
Well, I would suggest, just if you have a few minutes, that you guys should Google the title track, Headless Children, and the song Thunderhead. Listen to those. It'll give you a taste of what the album's all about. I think you'll like them.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. So, I guess we're on to my next pick. Or we're on Tim's. No, we're on Tim's.
No, that was Tim's.
You just picked Tim. Sorry.
Yeah,
so it is mine.
Yep.
So, I'm going to... 1989. I was fresh to the Chicago area. Just moved there probably, I think it was late 89, September, somewhere around there. And one of my first jobs that I got was at Rose Records. Okay. A company that no longer exists, unfortunately. They had, the record store with all the cassettes and CDs and whatnot. And one of the songs that we played, or one of the albums that we played before we would open up, because it was too controversial. Well, I don't know if controversial, just a little too much for the general public to listen to when we would open the doors. And it's borderline. I'm still not sure if I qualify it as heavy metal, but it's on this list on Wikipedia. And that is Nine Inch Nails' Pretty Hate Machine. And it's got a very kind of a bizarre techno feel to it, but it's got some heavy sounding guitar riffs in it, and Trent Reznor is just an interesting songwriter. And something about this album caught my attention, and they call it industrial rock or whatever they want to call it. But I've listened to this album many, many, many times, especially when I first experienced it. I was like, this is something different, something crazy, something cool. So that's it. What do you think? Hello, crickets?
I'm sorry, I lost the recording for a second.
You lost the connection? Tim, are you
Yeah,
there?
I lost the connection for a second.
I'm
Tim?
still here. I was waiting for Chris to jump in though. But yeah,
No.
Scott, I heard everything you said.
Okay, so Chris, what did you not hear?
That's a
You
great
can't answer
question.
that question.
That's the question. That's kind of circular question. Just who was the band? Because I lost you right after you started to talk, and I was trying to figure out what happened without hanging up.
Oh.
Who was the band?
9 Inch Nails, Pretty Hate Machine.
9 Inch Nails. Okay. All right, pull that. Let's see. Yeah, you were talking, and then it just went.
Went silent
I lost
on your
it.
side?
Yeah, it went silent for a minute. I didn't hit mute or anything. So, anyway.
Well, try as hard as you may, you cannot mute me anymore because I fixed my microphone problems.
I know. It's the same thing your wife said the other night too.
Oh, ouch!
Yeah. So, I'm not a big fan
Okay.
of 9 Inch Nails. I mean, obviously, Head Like a Hole. Everyone, if you're listening to the radio during this time and after that, you've heard that song 1,000 times. But I was never a big fan. I am extremely anti-keyboard, so anything with a keyboard in it, I almost instantly just let it go. And I know it's not fair to say that, but it's just my personal feeling. I've just been very anti-keyboard. So no, I just wasn't really a big 9 Inch Nails fan.
So why
Not
is
at
it
all.
every time I hear you pulling up in the car, you have 1984 by Van Halen playing?
Well, that's on a loop
In your IROC Z.
in my iRock with the T-tops off. One of them that's broken and won't close all the way. But no, I've never been a fan of keyboards, and I guess that comes from my prejudice against that kind of. It seemed very poppy. I think that's. I at one point in what I listened to, I never listened to a band that played keyboard, and I never listened to a band that had the word love in one of their songs. I'm not kidding. It really was. But anyway, they're talented, though. Don't get me wrong. I can separate what I like from saying somebody's talented, because it's two different things.
Yeah,
I might not like the music,
Trent Reznor
but I can say
definitely got something going on.
And he definitely went on. I mean, he went on to write movie scores and write songs and write music for other bands and even TV shows. So obviously an extremely talented musician. That I can never say that I won't respect somebody for being talented. Whether it's my type of music to actually listen to is a totally different conversation. But Trent Reznor, by far, Trent Reznor is, for this genre and a lot of others, the most talented musician that put out music like this. And obviously went on to do many, many other things musically that just reaffirm the fact that he's a very talented man.
Yeah, I just always love the fact that even though the song's not on this album, but the song "Hurt" was redone by Johnny Cash, and a very well done version of it. Like, just amazing. Anyway, Tim, what do you think about this one? What do you think about my crazy pick?
No, it's cool. It's interesting. I'm not a 9 Inch Nails fan. I will say that this album has the two 9 Inch Nails songs that I know, Head Like a Hole and Terrible Lie, and that's it. I guess you got to give this guy a lot of respect, but it's just not in my wheelhouse. Not at all.
Okay. All right. Wow.
But he also, I mean, he was very influential later in time with other bands that came out, that kind of industrial music, that sort of gave birth to a lot of different things, a lot of different bands, even split off into different genres. So when you see somebody like that who sort of was an epicenter for a movement or a musical type, then you know he was influential. And like bands like Stabbing Westward later, and even White Zombie in a little bit. It was more guitar-oriented White Zombie, but it still had some of that kind of that keyboard heavy sampling parts in it. So he did kind of begat again to say, you know, if he was an influence or an epicenter of a movement or a style. Obviously that's really cool.
Yeah. And something about him grabbed my attention. Now, it's funny, I listened to the lyrics on this album, and he was devastatingly heartbroken when he wrote these songs or something, because it really sounds like it's just this woman took his heart out of his chest and stomped on it right in front of him. But he got a little deeper as his albums came out, where he started, like, he was angry with a girl with this one, or angry, or, you know, crushed or whatever, but then, you know, he started getting angry at the world, and then the next album he was angry at God. I mean, it was just really, it's just a lot of anger built up or animosity in his writing. But I just like the style of the music was something different that I hadn't heard of, and I think that's what grabbed my attention. So even though it's a little on the techno side, it really has that almost a club feel in some senses, some of the songs. So since you guys don't know much about the songs, though, you know, you'll have to take my word for it.
Fine, I'll just take my podcast and go home.
Okay, so we only got to 2 picks each, but we're over an hour already. So we'll wrap it up for this week, and we'll continue on. Do you guys want to do this again next week and work on the rest of our picks? 'Cause
1989 Part 2. I never
I
thought
didn't see that coming.
I never thought of 1989 as a Part 2, but really looking, like, in the last couple of days, kind of prepping for this and looking at it, I could see where it was, because actually there's a lot more albums in 1989 than I anticipated.
I'm dying to hear Tim's next 4 picks, because you said you have 6, right?
Yep.
Okay. I want to hear what they are, and I'm sure I'm going to have more homework again.
Oh, I could easily have 6 too. Definitely.
Really?
Without
I was
question.
really struggling with this year.
Oh no.
Like
I'm right with Tim.
I might have to break out the White Lion on the next.
Yeah, I'm right with Tim. I could definitely see where I would have more than just 3, or struggle to have 3, certainly.
Okay. Well, that's cool. It's always a fun surprise to hear what you guys are bringing to the table. So anyway, you want to wrap this up and give our social media credentials and all that good stuff? Chris,
socially aware. Twitter is at Christopher Zen, and Facebook is just me, Christopher Warren.
And Tim?
And I'm at Twitter at TSW512, and Facebook, Tim Wodzinski.
Cool. And you can find us at 80's Auto Reverse on Twitter, or myself at Scott's Eye on Twitter, and at the Facebook page of 80's Mixtape Auto Reverse. So, all right, we will talk to you guys next time, and that is all. Have a good night.
Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this show. This podcast is part of the 80's Reboot Overdrive channel on Southgate Media Group. You can follow us on Facebook on the 80's Reboot group page. We're also on Twitter and Tumblr at 80's Reboot. We invite you to check out all the wonderful podcasts and blogs available at southgatemediagroup.com. And thank you for reliving the 80s.